And as I said, we're going to hold off questions to the end, which is now. And I'll invite Margaret Gatz up if you want to unmute yourself. Margaret has a great question for Deborah about vaccine hesitancy and information or misinformation around that.
Yeah, I mean, you could have read it. Deborah, I was just curious how much you picked up some of the specific concerns, like, is the vaccine going to affect fertility? Did people mention the vaccine being made with aborted fetal tissue? Did people mention Bill Gates inserting microchips? Or is some of that just encompassed under the general, I don't believe the vaccine is safe?
Yeah, so we did not ask about those specific responses, but we did capture some of that in our others. And when we had enough over the time that people were saying it, we then also included it as a response. I'm going to kick it to Tess and Jane because they actually are the project leaders on most of these surveys, so they're closer to the specific data that we captured. I know that there were at least a few people that worried about microchips, but I don't know if it was enough to actually be meaningful. Tess or Jane, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so we had those overall response options plus a few that Debbie didn't show, and then we did have an open-ended other. So I don't know how many people who were saying, I think a COVID-19 vaccine in particular would be unsafe, were thinking it would be unsafe because it has microchips in it or whatever. I know that, but we did eventually make, I'm in a group that hasn't already been approved response option that remained very low for the pregnant and breastfeeding women.
Great, thank you. Marco, I think, did you just raise your hand?
Yes,
Marco.
Thank you, Andrew. So I have a question for Tess. We have done a similar kind of analysis about the economic impact of COVID in the UAS, and we have a slightly different picture because even among low-income people, we do see increase in the level of satisfaction with finances, and they seem to be more optimistic about their ability to meet unexpected expenses. But then when we try to kind of understand the mechanisms, it seems that most of this effect is driven by having received stimulus checks. Do you have that information in your survey, and can you break it down by who got the checks and who didn't?
No, we don't have, I mean, in general, right? If people are saying their annual household income was 60,000 or less, they should have gotten a check. If they were single, they absolutely would have. If they were, yeah, it gets a little more complicated when you had different threshold for that. So we can maybe loosely assume that people who said their annual household income was that received the stimulus check, but we didn't ask anything about it.
Right. The reason why I was asking about that is because your survey is in April 2020, and by then, not everybody had got the check, right?
Right. That's correct.
So
and that was just that first time we asked these over time.
I see. Okay. Thank you.
We did that qualitative study that I started off with. We did a similar thing repeatedly over time. So I can give you some anecdotal support for the fact that when people received stimulus checks, it did help. It made them less worried, but that's not related to the AES data, and we don't know how generalizable that would be.
Thank you.
Of course. Thanks for your question.
I do have a question too, and I think it's for any of the speakers today. I am curious as to, and I know Karen, you talked about sort of looking forward past COVID, but I'm curious about the survey. What looking forward, what your plans are. I know it started as not a COVID survey in particular, and now you have all these insights about the impacts of COVID on various aspects of people's lives. But what's your plan sort of moving forward for this survey?
That's a very good question that we discussed. As a matter of fact, the next one goes in tomorrow. But yeah, I mean, we've been grappling with that. You know, as you know, we work for a magazine and website, and they have largely moved away from covering COVID as acutely as they were early on. So we are going to be going back more to the model that, as Debbie discussed, that we started out. And de-emphasizing COVID, you know, unless, you know, one of the purposes of this survey is to capture the zeitgeist. So if, you know, it starts to tick back up and we start to get some indication, we will probably go back in heavy-handed with it, but we will continue to track concern and to some extent vaccine rates through the foreseeable future.
Oh, that's awesome. Great. Do we have any other questions? Well, thank you all very much for a great session, and we're going to end a little bit early. So thank you for keeping your talks on time. I greatly appreciate that. Tara or Tanya?
Yeah, so we have a break until 2:45 Eastern time, so that's about 25 minutes. I guess we'll see everyone back at 2:45. If you need to stay in the room, mute yourself if you don't want to leave, but we'll see you in a little bit.